Under the stairs. It happened one day, when my mother and brother were coming home from his baseball game. I'd already been under the stairs for what seemed like an eternity. I'm still haunted by the sounds that filled the airwaves of the house that night. My father screaming at the top of his lungs, my mum crying out in anguish, my little brother whimpering. Then, the silence. Then, the cackling, maniacal laughter that turned into my father screaming my name. I remember being so scared that I couldn't even move. I stayed frozen, clutching onto the stuffed rabbit that my brother had forgotten from the last time we needed to hide. I was there from sundown until sunrise. I snapped out of my immobility when I heard the neighbour knocking at the door. He knew my father's dark side, and was always looking out for us when he could. He must have let himself inside, because I heard him immediately make a phone call. I stayed until I heard another voice calling my name. I finally crawled out into the arms of a police officer. I watched as my father was put into a patrol car and taken far away. He was locked up in a psychiatric hospital. That event took place almost 12 years ago now. I hadn't spoken to my father since, nor would I ever again. He was deemed unfit for society and would spend the rest of his days tranquilized in a padded room. The house had been left in the care of my aunt and uncle. They had been renting it out for the last 12 years, money away and paying off the mortgage in my name. Now that I was 18, the house would officially belong to me. I wasn't very keen on the idea of going back to my childhood slaughter home. In fact, the very thought turned my stomach. Against my better judgment, I made the move. It was hard at first, but after a couple of months, I quite enjoyed having the house to myself. It wasn't all bad. I have amazing memories of my mum and little brother. I just focused on those, and eventually it started to feel like home again. A terrible lightning storm had knocked the power out. I decided to head up to bed and call it a night. There was no way I was finishing the stupid show I was watching. With my flashlight in hand, I made my way to the staircase. As I did, I tripped over my own 2 feet. My flashlight rolled underneath the staircase. I dropped to all fours to reach under to get it. Albeit silly, I had a terribly hard time reaching inside. The hair on my neck was standing. Something was telling me to be afraid. I felt around for my flashlight and recoiled when I felt something soft. When I pulled it out and shined the light on it, the fright was washed away. A warmth came over me as I hugged my brother's rabbit tight once more. I brought it up with me to bed. The thunderstorm raged on as I fell deep asleep with the rabbit in hand. In the middle of the night, my cell phone shook me from my sleep. I answered to hear the same voice of the officer that I'd run to as a child. "Hello, Mike. This is Officer Travis McKenna. Sorry for calling so late at night. I'm calling to inform you that your father escaped from the psychiatric hospital earlier this evening. We're sending a squad car over to your house at this moment. We have no reason to believe he'd be coming there. But just to be safe, lock your doors and stay inside until the officer arrives." I thanked him and put my phone back on the charger. I basically sprinted downstairs and made sure the house was locked up tight. I never opened any of the windows. Those were always locked. Luckily, I locked the front and back door as well. I went back up to my room and stood by the window. I gazed out into the thunderstorm, waiting to see the lights of the patrol car. With a flash of lightning, I saw a glimpse of a silhouette of somebody standing at the edge of the driveway. The figure disappeared before the next bolt tore through the sky. The sound of broken glass rang throughout the house. The front door slowly creaked open. I started to hyperventilate as footsteps could be heard climbing the stairs. Step, step, step. I could hear somebody giggling as the footsteps became louder. Step, step, step. They were right outside of the door. The giggling then became laughter. I could feel my heavy heartbeat pounding in my chest. The doorknob started to jiggle. The laughter became a cackle. My father screamed my name as he pounded on the door. I hadn't even realised that I'd crawled under my bed, with a death grip on my brother's soft little rabbit. The banging on the door got louder and louder. My father screaming, frantically trying to get inside. Flashing red and blue lights lit up the room. The door swung open, and from under the bed, all I could see was his bare feet. He screamed my name again as he walked towards the bed. I heard somebody yell "freeze" in the doorway. The feet of my father turned and attempted to dash toward the officer. He didn't get one step before two bangs shot through the air. My father hit the ground, blood flowing from the wound on his neck. His gaze locked on mine. His hand reached for me as the light dimmed from his eyes. Still, I clutched my brother's rabbit. Home Alone. It all happened so long ago, it feels stupid to bring it up now. But I don't do therapy and I've had a couple of beers. So, here it goes. In the summer of 1995, my parents' marriage was on the rocks. As a last-ditch effort to revive the magic, my dad decided to whisk Mum away on a spontaneous romantic weekend getaway and asked if I could babysit my sister. Excited for a chance to prove how grown up I was, I agreed. Kind of funny now that I think about it. I was just 12 and Andrea was 8. I never left my own kids alone for a whole weekend at that age. Back then I thought it would be fun, having a weekend with no parents. My sister Andrea though, she was scared. Our old house had a way of coming alive at night. Oh, that house, man. I can still picture it. 2 stories with a pitch roof and a cylindrical tower at one corner. Weathered green paint showed the aging planks underneath, like the exposed bones of a dead animal, and the wraparound porch gave it a haunted feel before you even walked in. I guess Mum inherited it from my great-grandmother. Andrea called it the Green Castle when we first moved in, 4 years prior. But I never saw it like that. It sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, flanked by gnarled old oak trees that cast the creepiest shadows. Let me tell you, walking the trash down to the street after dark was a nightmare. Vines clung tightly to the walls, and the creaky porch swing swayed in the wind, adding its own eerie music to the sound of the place. And the front door was made of heavy oak with a clunky brass knocker. A huge stone fireplace that we only lit on holidays stood proudly in the living room, its mantel adorned with old family photographs and odd knickknacks. There was this grand staircase leading to the second floor where our bedrooms were. But the creepiest part was the attic. It was this big, dusty space where Dad would go to work on his projects. There was also some storage, forgotten toys, banana boxes of moth-eaten clothes, and a haunted old TV. One small window at the end of the room was the only source of natural light, casting long, stretching shadows. In the daylight, the house had a rustic, vintage charm to it. But at night, the shadows would play tricks on your mind, turning it into something out of a horror movie. And that one summer night in '95, something would happen that still gives me nightmares.
Please like and subscribe Horrorin' channel.
Our first day was easy. I felt like the coolest big brother ever. We binged on some NES games, Super Mario Bros. And Zelda, stuffed our faces with pizza, and had this awesome indoor camping session. It wasn't until the second night that things got freaky. I mentioned before there was this old, probably haunted TV in the attic. You know the kind, as big as a refrigerator and only got 4 channels on a good day. It started flipping on by itself, going nothing but static. I tried to play it cool for Andrea's sake, blaming it on bad wiring or something. But then, these whispers started. I couldn't make out what they were saying, just fragments of some alien conversation that seemed to be coming from the TV static. I finally went up there to turn the damn thing off. Now let me tell you, I've never seen my sister cling to her Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle plushie that tight before. She was terrified. but she followed me into the attic like the brave little firecracker she was. I turned the knob to off about 3 times, but it just continued hissing and crackling with white noise, so I ended up having to unplug it. Thinking that was the end of it, we returned to our little campsite, made of blankets, pillows and kitchen chairs, in the living room. But little by little, a chill had begun to seep into the house. Despite it being summer, the air inside grew bitterly cold. So cold we could see our breath. Even more bizarre, from the corner of my eye, I kept catching glimpses of spectral shapes darting past. When I snapped my head around to look, there'd be nothing there. Just the familiar rooms of our home, now draped in unnatural cold. And the whispers, they started again. Hushed, indistinct, always just out of earshot. Some part of me wanted to call the hotel number Dad had given me in case of an emergency. Before they'd left, he made it clear to 12-year-old me that the future of our family depended on him winning Mum back that weekend. I couldn't let everyone down by throwing in the towel because I was too scared. So we bundled up in warm blankets and sat in our parents' bed watching TV. Thankfully, it kept our minds occupied and drowned out the weird sounds coming from the attic. Eventually, Andrew's eyes drifted shut, and I remember yawning and turning the TV off before setting the remote on my dad's nightstand and closing my eyes. I woke up with a gasp, like someone had stepped on my grave and the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. Then, I heard Andrea say, "Mama?" My blood ran cold. Believe me when I say I've never been so scared in my life. The silhouette of a woman stood in the dark hallway just outside the door. Andrea started to sit up, but I reached out and grabbed her arm. "On," I whispered, heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. "That's not Mum." She whimpered, but I put a finger to my lips. I was absolutely petrified. My whole body was stiff with fear like I'd never experienced. I remember, for the half second before I turned away, I'd seen that it wore a long dress and had long, stringy hair. My mum had curly hair, and I could count on one hand the number of times I'd seen her in a dress. There was no question in my mind that it wasn't my mum. I pleaded, tears pricking the corners of my eyes, voice cracking as I tried to stay calm. Andrea's eyes widened and she started to cry. Somehow the sound of her breaking down seemed to give me the courage I needed to move. I looked back toward the dark figure in the doorway, and it was gone. I hugged her and rocked her like Mum did when she was a baby. When she finally stopped crying, I turned on every light in the house and we watched TV until 8 in the morning, and the sound of tyres on gravel signaled the end of our ordeal. Our mum came back early from her trip, without our dad, unfortunately. As much as it hurt to realise they were finally splitting up, I was too relieved to see her to process that life was about to change forever. My dad paid child support and sent us cards on our birthdays, but the man had no interest in actually being a father. Over the years, Mum apologised 100 times for letting him pressure her into leaving us alone that night. She hadn't felt right about it, and it ended up being the final straw that made her realise they didn't have the same priorities. All these years later, whenever my sister and I see each other, it's impossible not to bring up the thing we saw standing in the hallway that night. Looking back, I wonder if it was my great-grandma. Mum has mentioned that she always wore a long nightdress to bed, and looking at pictures of her, she had long, straight hair. As horrifying as it was in the moment, I wonder if it was just Mum's grandma trying to watch over us while we were home alone.